Hello everyone, I'm Michael, and today, I'm going to tell you a story. What's the most badass thing you've accidentally said in the heat of the moment? Part 1. Story 1. Big burly former Marine mercenary from Iraq was back stateside. Huge fucking mountain of a man. We came to face each other in one of the narrow corridors of the office where one of us was gonna have to turn sideways. Neither of us turned, but we stopped. I'm 6'260", and he still towered over me. He was a nice guy, but still a little conditioned, I guess you could say, or mentally unhinged. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "You feeling froggy?" It truly was like something out of a movie. Without blinking, I replied, "You better jump." We both cracked up and turned sideways, while the office breathed a collective sigh of relief. Story 2. I am a 4th grade teacher, and one day, I was up at the board and struggling to remember how to spell a particular word. I was trying to make light of it, telling the kids that sometimes adults need help with spelling too. One student replied, "It is because you were poorly educated." But don't worry, we are poorly educated too. Double whammy. Story 3. At work, project management undercut and mismanaged a project so badly. They pushed getting minimum viable product out with the goal to roll out improvements later. Product released, they all patted themselves on the back and moved on. Then that minimum viable product broke. In a meeting we had with our directors about how it's so broken, and the cost to fix it, etc., no cost too big, unlimited manpower, etc., I asked how come we couldn't afford to do it right, but we can afford to do it twice. Story 4. I'll never forget the moment a family walked into the local pub I was working at while I was working. This big king of the grill, bald, alpha patriarch dad type, and his wife and kids came through. I said, "Welcome, where would you like to sit?" And he snapped back, "Well, a table would be nice." And without missing a beat at all, I replied, "Actually, we usually sit on the chairs here." I'll never forget the satisfaction of that moment or the look on his face, haha. Story 5. My uncles were bitching about my dad, so I walked into the conversation and told them it wasn't polite to talk about people behind their backs. My uncle turned to me and said, "I shouldn't interrupt when the men are speaking and completely out of character." I replied, "I don't see any men in here." Boy, did I get some shit that day, but that's how I knew I won that exchange. Story 6. I worked in cell phone sales for a few years and a woman came in with a fairly new flip phone. This was 2018. We just still sold them. She was complaining cause one of the sides of the screen was dangling off and said she didn't do anything. It just snapped and demanded a new phone. I told her that looks like physical damage, and we don't have any coverage for that since you didn't buy a phone protection warranty. She insisted it wasn't physical damage and the phone just sucks and broke itself. She started freaking out and calling me all kinds of names and swinging her phone in my face, and then the top half of the phone literally snapped off and landed on the counter in front of me. I just looked her in the eyes and said, "Well, that was definitely physical damage." She lost her shit at my comment, and it was weirdly satisfying. Story 7. I didn't realize the nature of my comment when I wrote it, but in high school, one of my teachers did end-of-the-year anonymous evaluations. Everyone hated him, and I understood why, but I still did well in his class. I wrote, "I don't have any critiques about your teaching, but I think you should work on being a better person." Story 8. When I was 12, my older sister had a boy over for Thanksgiving dinner. She dated lots of douches, but this guy took the cake. Big, brash, annoying dickhead who was rude to her and basically everyone. As we sat down for dinner, before we were about to say what we were thankful for, he says, "Inaudible moron grunts how looks like." I'm seated at the head of the table. Must be important with a huge ass-eating grin. Without pausing, I gestured to my dad seated opposite him and said, "Actually, my dad is at the head of the table. You're the asshole." My mom scolded me for swearing at the table, but years later told me her, and my dad thought it was hilarious. Story 9. After 4 years in an abusive relationship and 1 year of an abusive marriage, I told my ex that I wanted a divorce. He told me that I couldn't divorce him or I'd go to hell. My response was, "Well, I guess I'll see you there." I then kicked him out of my house, for which he had never paid a dime in bills, and told him to call his mom for a plane ticket. Not the most badass story here, but it felt good. Story 10. I was around 17 or 18 and getting my first filling at the dentist. They pumped me up with nitrous oxide for pain and to help me relax during the procedure. Dentist came back and asked me, "How are you feeling?" All I said was, I don't, and he lost his shit and cracked up for what seemed like 20 minutes before he could pull himself together. I also started cracking up because of the laughing gas, and his laugh was infectious. So we were both just sitting in the room laughing, and all his assistants came by and were very confused. Story 11. I got super drunk when I was probably 25, got in a bar fight, as was my habit, and got knocked out cold, also a bad habit back in those days. Woke up in an emergency room to a cop who said, "It's 4:30 a.m. You're in so-and-so emergency room. You just blew a .29 back, so I have to take you to the detox center now." I stood up from the chair. They had me in and the cop goes, "Hey, wait, are you okay to walk?" And I threw my arm around his shoulder and bellowed out, "Walk. Hell, I'm driven, let's go." He was not amused, and he got a little rough with me, but about half the emergency room staff completely lost it. Also, I eventually quit drinking and fighting, though it took about 10 more years of failures before I hit that point. Story 12. Young male, traveling with a bunch of other males. Border Patrol. We were being searched for drug smuggling. Border Patrol agent. You know I have the authority to cavity search you. Me. Somehow without skipping a beat. Sure you might, but neither of us would enjoy it, and you wouldn't find anything. Off the hook. No fingers in my butt. Story 13. A couple months ago, my now ex-friend was telling me all the things that were wrong with me, and she finished it with, "And at least, I don't have to wear makeup to look pretty." I was so fed up with her shit, so I responded, "At least, I am capable of looking pretty." She was speechless, and I felt like such a badass because this was the first time I ever stood up to her. Story 14. I'm a writer, and I do a bit of stand-up comedy. As such, people tend to introduce me to new people as a comedian, etc. So, I was outside a bar smoking with a friend of a friend. He then introduced to one of his friends. His friend was dressed like Liam Gallagher from Oasis and seemed to exude a bit of a cocky, sneery manner. The introduction went thusly. "Friend of friend, Mr. Gallagher, this is Ritteroff. He's a comedian." Mr. Gallagher looks me up and down. "Comedian, eh? Does that mean you think you're funny?" Ritteroff. "No, it means everyone else does." I literally do not know where it came from. I didn't think about the response. It just came out. And it is hands down the greatest thing I've ever said. Story 15. At work at a company meeting, someone was presenting something cool they volunteered to work on and finished. They then explained things they thought they could do better in a self-deprecating way, and a bunch of other people started railing into his work with petty criticism. It was definitely good work, though, and a thought just hit me, so I blurted it out. Sometimes done is the best feature. A bunch of people laughed, and then the criticism stopped. People gave him kudos, and we moved on. Not really badass, but I was surprised this thought somehow came out fully formed, like it was some phrase I've been saying for decades. I guess I was just realizing how many people don't finish anything they start. So done suddenly seemed like a pretty damn good feature. Give the man some credit for finishing the damn thing. Story 16. Back in high school, I was a slow fat kid. For Pee-wee'd jog about a km to the beach, have a swimming lesson, then jog back. I was the last one back to the school grounds, and the teacher was standing at the gate. He told me that 'cause I was too slow, he was going to lock the gate and I'd have to jog to the next one 200 meters away. I said that I'd consider him locking me out of school grounds to be a suspension and just go home. He let me in straight away. Kinda wished he'd tried calling my bluff so I could have followed through and just gone home. Story 17. I was in an acting class in college, and we were doing a scene where a couple was having a big drawn-out fight. Multiple pairs went through the scene, and I studied it pretty hard, so I knew all the lines. We're about halfway through our performance when my partner clearly forgets what her line is. And because everyone was doing that scene, they could tell she had forgotten as well. Her next line was supposed to be, "Well, I'm sorry I asked." I'm not usually a quick thinker on my feet, but I just filled the second or two of awkward silence with "I bet you're sorry you asked, huh?" and continued on with my lines. Not overly badass per se, but the class and professor loved it and all laughed. Probably the only quick-witted thing I've ever done in my life. Story 18. There was this one extremely attractive girl in my COM 101 class in college. One day, for a project where we interviewed other students, I was partnered with her. We ended up not finishing our questions in class, so I asked her if I could meet her somewhere to finish interviewing her. She said yes. Fast forward to the next day, I meet her after her dance group finishes rehearsal. I knock through the last few questions, and the final one which I asked is, what do you perceive the future to hold? She replies, I don't even know what I'm having for dinner tonight. I have no idea what the future holds. So I say, well, if you don't know what you're having for dinner, do you want to have dinner with me? She laughed, said yes, and though we only hooked up that night, I still look back on that day as one of the best dating stories I've had yet. Story 19. Me and my girlfriend at the time were having a discussion about her going back to school. She kept putting it off every semester, and one day, she got angry at me trying to get her to actually go back, not just talk about it, and she yelled Rome wasn't built in a day. And I responded, yeah, but it was built, and a decade later, I still think of that. Edit. She did end up going back to school. Got her master's even. She's married now with twins. Just a real asshole. Story 20. At a party a few years back, someone stole my friend's purse. Her boyfriend found the guys who took it and got it back for her, but he was still in an angry, drunken rage and was continuing to escalate the situation when he was well outnumbered. My friend finds me and says, I'm afraid, boyfriend, is about to get into a fight. I need your help. Stop him, please. I stand up and I tell her, I can't promise you I can stop him from fighting, but I can promise you I won't let him lose. Before walking off to find him. Ultimately, no fight actually broke out, and I didn't realize that. I had basically said a cheesy one-liner until after the fact when my friend told me how intense that line was. I didn't mean for it to sound so dramatic. I just wanted to let her know I wouldn't let him get his ass kicked. I didn't mean to make it sound like I was about to demolish 3 guys by myself like I'm some sort of action hero. Story 21. This one had a little setup, but I think it's funny enough to share. At a family vacation, my grandmother was giving me grief for not remembering her birthday. I've never been good with birthdays. After telling me it was the password to her iPhone, she wanted me to take a picture with it, which is why I needed the password. While she was distracted, I opened up the settings, changed her password to my birthdate, and then set her phone down. 15 minutes later, she's trying to get into her phone, and it's not working. Suspecting mischief, she grumpily asks me if I've changed the password to her phone in front of our entire family. I admit that I did. Well, what is it? She asked impatiently. It's my birthdate. She sat there in stunned silence for about 15 seconds, not being able to remember my birthday before our family exploded laughing. Was a good time. Story 22. On opening night, we were performing the scene from Christmas Future where Scrooge's former employees are pawning off all his stuff. The pawnbroker went to hand some coins to the girl next to me, but she dropped them. Everyone froze for a split second, and I saw an opportunity. I figured any character who would loot a dead guy's house and sell off his stuff wouldn't have any qualms about pocketing someone else's cash, so I dove for it. The other girl caught on and immediately and went after it, too, and we made an improvised bit of fighting over it. Afterward, my co-stars congratulated me on my quick thinking, and the director liked how it played out so much that he made it a permanent part of the show. It wasn't anything monumental, but it added a couple of laughs in what was otherwise a pretty dark scene. Has to be my proudest acting moment. Story 23. I was crazy about this dude. He was intelligent, hot, funny, and a bit older. After a few weeks of dating, he said he wasn't ready for a commitment. I told him to come pick up his book from my place and not to reach out again as it hurt too much. I was that into him. So he comes to my apartment. I go to hand him the book and begin to shut the door. He puts his foot in the way to stop it and says, I don't know what to do. I'm not ready, but I can't stop thinking about you. Moving my hand off the door, I hand him the book anyways and said, then pick me up at 7. Anyways, now we're married. Story 24. In a class at university, each student had to give a presentation about a scientific paper and answer questions about it. We were told to ask the speaker questions, because otherwise the professor would, and his questions would obviously be harder. That professor was really brutal in his critiques of the presentations, but also fair and accurate. In any case, I asked a question after every single presentation, but when my turn came, no student wanted to ask anything. So the professor asked me if I wanted to ask myself a question. Without even thinking about it, say, how come your presentation was so extremely excellent? I was mentally preparing to be chewed out. Instead, the professor needed a minute to stop laughing, and then gave me the best grade possible. Story 25. I worked as a bartender at what was arguably the busiest bar. On a typical, overwhelmingly busy Saturday, I was working the service bar and it was absolutely humming as it always was, making and distributing craft cocktails at breakneck speeds for servers, and also taking orders of the raving lunatics demanding to quench of what seemed an insatiable thirst. It was a blur of ice and juice and madness as I crushed ice and fruit, and squeezed bottles of syrups and juices and topped drinks with myriad garnishes, and I was in the zone. I was crushing it, achieving god-tier levels of drink making, and while doing so I try to take a young lady's order and she says, excuse me, you'll my friend a drink, and while I was still busy doing my thing I asked, why, to which she replied, because you got my friend, wet, residual splash, another innocent victim of the war on drink tickets, and without skipping a beat, I said, yeah, her and every girl who's ever been in here turned away carrying on about my business, and to this day, I've yet to experience that level of overwhelming self-satisfaction in my life. She didn't even respond. She knew she had been owned. My only regret is that nobody witnessed what is quite possibly the crowning achievement of my life. To anyone who feels that this is sad, I wish I could give that feeling so you could understand and feel what I felt because you are freaking missing out.